By 2050, most of the world's population will be living in cities, but not everyone will choose this lifestyle. So, how might those wishing to go off the grid be able to do so while enjoying the comforts of modern technology? In 1878, Thomas Edison installed a private electric system in his residence, and by the end of the century, the DC versus AC, direct current versus alternating current debate was resolved, and residential electricity began to appear. About 5% of US homes had electricity by 1900, and by the 1920s, most homes were connected. In 1936, the Rural Electrification Act aimed to make it universal, though near-universal electrification was not achieved until 1960. Getting power to rural homes was challenging, but using the same poles for power and telephone lines helped a lot, as cell towers weren't even on the radar then. In fact, radar itself wasn't invented until 1935. Before phones, alternatives would have required large radio towers and either brought in electricity or an on-site generator. Generators at the time were costly in terms of purchase, maintenance, and expertise. Many rural homes had them, but they weren't practical for every household compared to connecting to a standard 60-amp 230-volt fuse panel typical for rural homes and barns. The advantage of an on-site generator is reduced transmission loss, whereas rural homes lose significant energy running down miles of wire. Central power generation, however, requires little user skill or maintenance beyond occasional visits from an electrician to install or maintain it. A single large generator is generally more cost-effective than numerous smaller residential ones. In cities, the math was simple, as fewer wires are needed, and apartments or dense areas are not suited to generators. Backup batteries can handle short power losses too. However, for rural areas, the economics are less straightforward, and technology might change this dynamic. Transmission wires are vulnerable to storms, and miles of wire serving only a few hundred people won't receive repair priority like dense urban infrastructure. As I'm recording this, we just saw Florida, Georgia, and the Carolinas savaged by storms and hurricanes. Power is still out for over 1 million people. We had a storm rip through my area, northeast Ohio, this summer that dropped power for over a day to around a sixth of 2 million households in the region, with more than 100,000 still out multiple days later and thousands out even a week afterwards. One of those that only lasted for a bit over a day is the old farmhouse my wife had bought about the time we started dating. She ended up moving in with me when we got married, and then we moved a year later to a place we found together. Thankfully before the real estate market and rates went completely nuts. Free life advice for newlyweds. Picking a place together you both genuinely like is always a good idea if circumstances permit. We've been slowly fixing up that old farmhouse in our limited spare time and had just started renting it out as an Airbnb. There were a lot of out-of-state crews that came in to work on the storm outage, and a team of 6 or 7 stayed there during the 10 days of repair. And being electricians, they were fairly taken with the old generator shed and knob and tube wiring there. I told them they are welcome to mess with it if they liked, and I have too. It's got a vintage feel. It's not operational, but in quite good condition, since like many of the generators of that era, it's built so heavy it would probably take another century to rust down. It got me thinking on whether or not the same economic paradigm still applied, especially in this era of off-the-grid technology. And for a lot of people, it doesn't necessarily have to be a straight-up economic decision. For many, that jugular vein is also a leash, forcing them to buy energy, potentially energy generated in a fashion they don't approve of either. And if anything, there was an effort to prevent off-grid power, because if you have a lot of expensive wires out to service an area, and a third of the folks decide not to use it, in favor of private generators or solar, you still have all that wire to pay for. So this is going to be part of our conversation for today, but we're not limited to just discussing electricity or phones and internet, which cell towers and now Starlink offer alternatives to. We are also thinking of water, sewers, and maybe even more abstract ideas like garbage or even roads themselves. Very appropriately, roads are a good place to begin our journey today because that's generally where the philosophical basis for the other utilities comes from. In the US, borrowing off some Greco-Roman and English traditions, public roads were a big deal that the state should handle. They allowed troops and supplies to move, thus were vital for defense, and commerce could flow through them too. Electricity and phone lines were pushed along this same reasoning. They were simply more modern siblings to roads, filling the same role, and the political push for them post-World War I and into the World War II and post-war climate, along with the Eisenhower interstate highway system, both rested heavily on the notion that roads were for defense and commerce, and that phone electricity were too. I've noticed the same reasoning in pushes for high-speed broadband internet in rural areas in the last decade or so, more for the commerce than defense angle, and COVID's push to work from home helped push the apparent need to get broadband out to everywhere. The same hasn't applied to water and sewer though, and most of the homes in my area either have a well or they have city water, but with a septic tank, and the reasoning isn't hard to understand. Unlike electricity and batteries, water isn't hard to store efficiently, neither is sewage. There's nothing cheap about digging a well or a septic system, but it's often cheaper than digging all those pipes out to a residence, and even houses without reliable well water can have a cistern that gets filled by a tanker truck at a sane price. Thus there's never been the pressure to get water and sewer out everywhere, and it generally only becomes mandatory when an area is getting too built up for local wells and groundwater to support. As a result, we've also seen a lot more R&D and innovation in these as off-grid options, whereas while generators have improved, they've mostly done it as a smaller pair of markets, premium devices for facilities that need continuous power, like hospitals, and mobile short-term ones for those needing a mobile power source. Some folks really do get their money's worth out of a portable generator, but even ignoring the cost of buying and maintaining that generator, you'll be spending a few times the cost per kilowatt hour of the grid just from the inefficiency of small engines. It's more about the loss of value if your home or business is shut down during a power outage, as you might be paying 50 or 60 cents a kilowatt hour for your generator power, but you're still running rather than idle. Solar is doing better than that, but given that power outages tend to occur during horrible weather, it's not really your ideal backup option even during daytimes. Though it's great for rolling blackouts during the summer when the demand for air conditioning on sunny days overloads the grid. Standby home generators are still eye-popping on cost, and also home electric systems still remain very user-unfriendly. They are not set up so you can just plug a solar panel in to augment the supply. For a given value of the word "you" here, given that my audience tends to be on the technically savvy side, and we mean the average adult, including those on the lower side of the bell curve. My hunch is that this is coming, and I think it will be a big deal for the 2030s. I think most folks would like to be as off-grid as possible when it comes to reliance, and home electric generation is starting to get genuinely feasible. This isn't necessarily off-grid here either. You have homes on grid, and they generate and use power, and sometimes that's in surplus, so that some homes will have a reduced bill, and others might even turn a profit. And for many, that ability to continue to operate, even if at a reduced level during a power shortage, is nice. It also decreases the overall burden on the grid. We could imagine that happening for water and sewer too, but those generally only go down from earthquakes, not storms, and I don't think there'd be a desire to be getting water pumped from someone else's well or collecting sewage from someone else's home. I do think that will be more the norm for suburban and denser rural areas going forward, but it is not off the grid, and thus does still place that constraint on those who want to be totally off the grid for one reason or another. Your definition of what off the grid means might vary too, extending beyond utilities into general reliance on others or civilization. And again, that's our main focus for today, and now that we've outlined the basic reasoning and logistical issues, what's the future look like for being off-grid? This depends a lot on how off the grid we want to get, and obviously for those of us interested in space development, that is very vital to that effort. Indeed, I keep up on off-grid tech more for my involvement with space development than as a rural homeowner. For a lot of folks, getting off-grid is about eliminating a foreseen dependency, and so that can get pretty abstract. We talked about the most extreme case of that in our episode The Fermi Paradox, Hermit Shoplifter Hypothesis, where we try to imagine a civilization that's able to be so off the grid and individually independent that they don't even need a civilization. Everyone's got their own personal space yacht, complete with fusion reactor, 3D printer, or Star Trek-style replicator, and sufficiently advanced AI and archives that they don't even have doctors or police or courts or even family. The ship provides all. And given that the person in question might be fairly post-human themselves, they may more or less be the ship, and thus not dependent on it, but rather view it as their body. That episode is actually a bit grim in its outlook, maybe arguing that, at least for humans, some interdependency is good for its own sake. We have a long way to go before we be that independent. A space colony along the lines of those we discussed in Space Homesteading earlier this year is a great example of where we are probably aiming, because some domed farmstead on Mars or a habitation drum embedded in a small asteroid or comet is about as off the grid as you're going to get. If you can make those work, then you can make a home in the middle of the Sahara or north side of Siberia. Of course, people already do, and our interest is in making that a little bit more practical and without as much hardship. I should also note that power transmission does not have to involve wires. We can beam energy down from space as microwaves, and we can send it to others the same way. Instead of having a wire to your home, you might have a microwave antenna, a rectenna, on your home that you could buy power through from anyone in your transmission window. That will generally lose more to conversion of microwaves and back to electricity than shipping electricity through wires will, but not too bad, and it is distance dependent. Of course, superconducting cable might do even better, but the cost of wires isn't really transmission loss anyway, it's building and maintaining of that wire grid. And that math changes quickly if your average population density is 1,000 people per square mile in a suburb of a city or 1 square mile per person, like it might be in the tundra or desert, or would be on a newly settled planet. Indeed, you would need 56 million people on Mars, evenly spread out, to get to that density. Economically, wherever you're settling, you should always have a relative surplus of something and a deficit of another, so being in some sort of trade with other folks makes sense. And being energy independent of them sounds nice, but that doesn't mean much if you're still stuck in dependency on them for food or water. So the other aspect of that is knowing who you're trying to be independent of and why. I have a lot of backup power at my house in terms of batteries, because having the power flick off in the middle of an hour-long recording or while you're rendering a 4K video is a lot worse than just having 10 or 20 minutes of spare power to wrap things up in. After that, it starts getting into a math and stats competition to decide if the cost of a backup generator per year is going to even out against that once-a-decade storm that knocks power out long enough you have to toss out everything in the freezer, and what value a person places on more abstract concepts like peace of mind. And abstract does not mean unreal. Stress, anxiety, and distraction are absolutely ruinous on productivity and healthy relationships. A water cistern that needs refilling once a month, and which half a dozen local companies can do, is a very different animal than power independence from an electric company that needs to refill it every second, and which there's really only one provider for. And both vary from a septic tank that might only need to be pumped every few years. This same reasoning applies to things like food independence, and you can buy food that can store for years too, along with basic staples like a 50-pound sack of flour that has enough calories for someone to eat for almost 2 months and costs about $20. Ditto similar staples like beans, rice, vegetable oil, corn, and so on. It's nice to have some stockpiles, and it's nice to be able to get online and get deliveries from Amazon, which still limits you to living by a road or having a vehicle that can get there. Drone deliveries might alter that, and for some, a personal helicopter and an ATV might be more economical or desirable than trying to build a road. You might say, hey, a helicopter is going to use way more fuel than a truck, but for context, roads take up land area, so a kilometer-long dirt road 5 meters wide, representing 5,000 square meters, or half a hectare, or a bit over an acre of land that could be producing solar power or biofuels, or even just be untouched woods you have harvested for biomass once a decade, that you harvest for a quart of wood a year or the equivalent of a couple hundred gallons of fuel, which might easily cover the difference in fuel costs and road maintenance. In many cases, not. But our emphasis here is that your potential level of autonomy often has aspects to it we tend not to think of, and which a new bit of technology might change easily. Or even a shift in production scale, as helicopters are obviously expensive but would drop in cost vastly if mass-produced like cars are. A house on a barren island or stretch of coast might find it easier to desalinate its own water, and that's a process that solar power is great for, as outside the Arctic Circle you would never be absent sunshine for a month-long stretch and can use sunlight at peak times to desalinate your water into a cistern with your surplus energy. If you are in the Arctic Circle, you will have ice nearby and that will be drinkable water when melted, not salt water. Alternatively, there you need power to melt it and keep it melted, and that's where we might seriously consider nuclear power. Needless to say, a fusion reactor you could buy and put in your personal home would be awesome, and maybe we will have such things by the end of this century, but I wouldn't hold my breath on it. And an air supply is another thing you have to worry about in off-planet housing, or maybe in a more smog-choked dystopia. But personal nuclear power in the form of a small home or community reactor, or even an RTG, is viable. A plutonium-238 radioisotope thermal generator has a half-life of 88 years. A 20 kilowatt one is still generating 10 kilowatts 88 years from now, and 5 kilowatts 88 years after that, meaning one built back in 1848 would just be down to that 5 kilowatt quarter strength this year. Plutonium-238 is pretty pricey. You'll hear $4 million a kilogram, but that's a very dubious figure since no mass production is involved. That kilogram would be generating 570 watts initially, so you would need 35 kilograms for your 20 kilowatt generator, at a cost of $140 million. And you'd get about 17 million kilowatt hours out of that over that 176-year period, which works out to be about $8 a kilowatt hour. It's hard to imagine many cases of that being economical, but the reality is that a breeder reactor can produce large amounts of plutonium-238 way cheaper than that, particularly as we can make it through a couple steps from uranium-238, the stuff we call depleted uranium, and which is vastly cheaper and more abundant than any of the isotopes of uranium we consider enriched. I'm not really pushing for a plutonium RTG economy, incidentally, though plutonium does not automatically mean weapons-grade material, plutonium-239. 238 is not a good bomb material, so that would not involve putting weapons-grade material in everyone's homes, as you might have been thinking. Regardless, we were just noting that even an extreme case like that could probably be gotten down to modern energy costs. We'd also build fission reactors down the low kilowatt range, and I don't think we should casually dismiss the impact of AI and better automation on small-scale production and maintenance costs. And again, the notion is autonomy, not economic viability. It may be cheaper to run a power cord to your house than keep a reactor in your basement, but if power is cheap and abundant enough compared to your overall personal economy, it might be viable the same way buying bottled water to drink is viable, while vastly more expensive than tap water. Now, while I think a lot of folks would very much enjoy having their own power source and water filters and even gardens and greenhouses for food, what we mostly mean by off-grid autonomy is electricity, and we mostly are thinking of solar power, with wind and geothermal also as options. And here is where, as fond as I am of nuclear power, I think these always have an advantage in rural areas. For cities, such autonomy just isn't in the cards, and even if it were, you are so reliant on others for other survival aspects that power independence just doesn't mean much. On the other end of the equation, a 570-watt solar panel might be able to be constructed to mass no more than a kilogram, and even not needing much maintenance beyond wiping off once a year, and I'm thinking this will always be cheaper than a kilogram of plutonium or even uranium-238. Obviously, you need more than that for covering bad weather and nighttime, but I imagine you get the point. Plus, we may be able to make home wind power more viable, which might reduce nighttime battery needs and help a lot in cloudier weather. A diverse power generation system also decreases your dependence on vagaries of nature, not just fellow humans. In a highly automated economy, the price of your solar panels probably drops to mostly installation and lifetime replacement costs, and likely the same for wind power. If we imagine a household needing to store 100 kilowatt hours to make it through longer nights successfully, then my napkin math says you either need 400 kilograms of lithium-ion batteries or about 3 tons of lead-acid batteries, which I'm pricing at $15,000 and $10,000 and $2024 respectively. And the lithium will do way better for lifetime if you're going through most of that regularly, though I could see using a bank of both for handling nighttime and bad weather. Assume you're replacing that every decade too, so that you're probably spending $1,500 a year on batteries. Both of those might come down in relative cost from the same improved automation, and for that matter we have battery concepts on the table that might be vastly better in performance or cost than either lithium or lead acid. We also do have alternative ways to store energy, like compressed gas or molten salt, which since it isn't under pressure is a lot safer for home use than, say, compressed gas, steam, or propane. A lot of folks sit on natural gas deposits too, and accessing those might work well in conjunction with geothermal energy, which is a great option for temperature control of your home, if often not great for electricity. Fossil fuels have their own problems, but the episode is on autonomy, not environmental concerns, and you could be producing energy by burning wood or biomass-intensive crops too. Wood gas generators were fairly popular designs, even for running vehicles, during World War II, and doubtless modern technology in conjunction with some focused R&D would produce better results. I've also seen figures for molten salt power storage at only a few % of lithium-ion cost, though that might be optimistic and also is at a larger scale. There's nothing preventing a home molten salt storage system. I think the words molten salt make it sound a touch dangerous, but it's rather similar to a hot water heater, only much bigger and probably outside your home. You also have non-molten salt energy storage. Regular old salt batteries have been contemplated as a possible cheap and more environmentally friendly power storage option for some time now. They're not going to be replacing your phone or laptop batteries, but they may be ideal for mass production. I've seen near-term production estimates as low as $44 per kilowatt hour for storage cost, which is a third to a quarter what you'd expect to pay currently for residential lithium-ion storage, and with possibly double the life cycle too. And given how much more abundant salt is than lithium, there's a lot of room for costs to drop with more technology, much as the abundance of silicon makes solar promising. We could also be seeing solar energy used to power Sabatier reactions to produce carbon-neutral methane for burning at night, or in fuel tanks, or even making gasoline instead. So too, someone might crack a great recipe for some algae that can grow in backyard tanks and get dumped in a home still to make biofuel cheap and easy. That's all technology on the relatively near horizon, some available and some of it even now. We have an episode coming up next month on emerging energy technologies that will go over them and others. But I think for folks into off-the-grid and homesteading, or just augmenting your home supply, the emerging market does look promising to make that a lot easier and cheaper. I would also say, given that a lot of the audience is younger techies looking for a future career, that R&D on a lot of these is likely to be a good path, especially as it does have a real niche for early premium markets, precisely because it offers autonomy, not just economy, which makes it much easier to get a foot in the door. There's a lot of options we didn't touch on today either, like micro hydroelectric or solar thermal, and again there's so much that has nothing to do with energy production or storage, or could overlap. We might imagine the typical off-the-grid home or even suburban dwelling having a geothermally heated greenhouse that was mostly tended by robots who flopped fresh produce into your kitchen and the waste into your own personal biofuel reactor, and the same sort of technology would probably even more easily allow them to tend big algae vats or wash off solar panels. And sometimes it's just about convenience, not needing to run to the store for things that don't keep well, and grow them at home instead. But that first makes me think milk, bread, and eggs, and I don't recommend trying to keep a cow around. so that's more where innovation and scaling of grocery delivery is likely to come up, which might also have good overlap for folks wanting to produce farm goods locally for sale locally and with minimal middlemen or difficulty going from home farm or garden to table. Same as before, I'm not sure will ever be the most efficient path, but it has some clear appeal, so I'm thinking some app for helping folks grow and sell locally, and buy locally, might be the next iteration of farmers markets and stalls. Always hard to say, but the good news is that if you're looking to be off the grid, it's getting easier every year, and allows a lot more customization of your options for what you want autonomy on. That said, I would feel remiss if I didn't point out that interdependence has a lot going for it in practical context, and likely that will remain the case going forward. But as I like to say, technology is about opening the door to new options. Whether or not all those options are better or better for you, I'll leave up to you, which of course is part of the point of autonomy and being off the grid. One of the points of autonomy is personal security, and the two go hand in hand, and in modern times that includes cybersecurity. There's a lot of important steps to protecting yourself from getting hacked, but that begins with protecting your identity, and yet there are companies that harvest your data and legally sell it to anyone, even malicious actors. AI has only made them more potent, and while they are legally required to take your data down if you ask, they make that process difficult. That's where Incogni comes in. They use their AI to find your data and send takedown requests. All you have to do is sign up, give them permission to act on your behalf to delete data, then they go to work and your data goes away. You can check up on the progress and see who had your data and how detailed and risky it was considered. Incogni makes these data harvesters take your info down, and they keep doing it too, making sure that it stays down. Incogni is available risk-free for 30 days, so you can try it out and get a full refund if you aren't happy with the service. Use code IsaacArthur at the link in the episode description to get an exclusive 60% off an annual Incogni plan. Go to incogni.com/IsaacArthur and take your data back. So that's it for today, but join us this weekend, December 15th, as we explore what science has to say about gravitic spaceship propulsion. Then we'll return to something a little more grounded in the here and now, as we look at giant space elevator tethers attached to the ground and the improvements and updates that might allow us to build those in the next couple of decades. It is possible that once we get into space and get more advanced technology, we'll find we no longer need large civilizations and production chains. And so in 2 weeks, we'll look at technologically advanced hermits and the Fermi paradox, and ask if the reason we don't see advanced civilizations is that they fall apart and scatter from a lack of need for interdependence. If you'd like to get alerts when those and other episodes come out, make sure to hit the like, subscribe, and notification buttons. You can also help support the show by becoming a member here on YouTube or at Patreon, or check out other ways to help at isaacarthur.net. Until next time, thanks for watching, and have a great week.